They had a good life in Syria, and all of a sudden bombs were dropped and everything destroyed and everything taken from them.
This is Dan Dix here, reporting for Press for Truth. The situation with refugees coming into Canada right now is growing out of control in more ways than one. The backlog is growing. Families are being dropped off and left feeling completely abandoned. And all the while, the Trudeau government, along with the public sector, are doing everything that they can to stifle the efforts of the real heroes. Those in the private sector who are doing everything they can to save the lives of those fleeing war-torn countries. In today's video, I interviewed one of those heroes, a woman who's been involved behind the scenes of the various refugee sponsorship programs for over 30 years here in Canada. And what she is witnessing today will turn your stomach and make your heart sink. She asked that I not reveal her identity, and I will certainly honor that to protect this very important source. So without further ado, this is the truth about Canadian refugees. What you need to know. So why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit of your background in regards to your involvement with bringing refugees into Canada?
Sure. Well, I've been involved with refugee sponsorship since 1979, and that would be when the first Indo-Chinese Vietnamese boat people movement happened. And since that time, for the first 20 years, I was doing it as a volunteer. We got involved in sponsoring a family through our church parish at the time, and I continued to be involved because what had happened at that time was after the family was sponsored, I found that they had others there in the camp, and so I continued on to try to help assist them. And for 20 years I volunteered in bringing some of the Vietnamese, reuniting the families, and getting them into Canada and helping them settle. After 20 years of volunteering, I was recruited by a major organization, a charitable Christian organization, to be the refugee sponsorship administrator there. And I continued there for 10 years, and then after retiring, it seems that it came back to the table for me, and I was asked to go on a particular trip to visit a refugee camp, and so here I am back into refugee sponsorship again. So 36 years under my belt with helping reunite families that were torn apart by war. Now, I worked with a number of different cultures, from African, Iranian, Iraqi, Syrians, Russian even, and from people from the Congo, and Sudanese, and so a number of different cultures is what I've worked with.
So over the last 36 years of doing this, what sort of changes have you seen in particular to the Canadian system when it comes to accepting refugees?
Canada is still very open to accepting refugees, but I'm finding now that, of course, with the most recent events, especially after 9/11 and other things, it tend to get a lot harder in so much as the process in bringing them here, the screening process and that type of thing, which of course we welcome the screening process, but what we're finding now is the backlogs are very, very long and they're very strenuous, and there doesn't seem to be any necessary for it, because the same screening process was there 36 years ago, and they were very tight at that time as well. So I'm not understanding the backlog, other than the processing times seem to continue to, it's not improving. It's actually getting worse in the length of time that it takes to get somebody here.
Well, it seems that, Trudeau is pushing towards bringing a lot more people very soon. And with this massive backlog, I don't really understand how that's going to work. So can you maybe tell us a little bit of the difference between what you do in the private sector compared to what the government is doing in the public?
Well, Canada Resettles refugees through two corresponding programs. The government-sponsored stream, where refugees are selected from the United Nations camps and live in government housing, and that parallels the private stream that gets the community involved. So in the private stream, refugees are sponsored through charities, churches, families, and of course that helps the refugees finding housing and get settled into the local community. These community groups assist newcomers in finding like their employment, enrolling kids in school, completing basic tasks like banking and groceries and shopping.
Essentially helping to assimilate them into society.
Absolutely, and it's a mentoring, and the refugee and the sponsor end up becoming family almost. They bond together and they take care of one another, and it's very interesting. The human connection is when I see it evolve, is actually very amazing to watch that human connection when people come in. Now, unlike government refugees, on the other end, they compete for sometimes scarce government resources, and they receive little or no community support. Many, for instance, of the Syrian refugees sponsored by the government reported feeling abandoned and lost once they arrived in Canada. So there's quite a bit of difference there. It's been reported that the privately sponsored refugees, let's say even from Syria, are 5 times more likely to have found work in Canada and nearly 5 times more likely to speak English or French compared with those who were sponsored by the Trudeau government.
Well, what is their mentality in regards to welfare programs coming over here? And, does the government encourage people to get on these programs, or what would you say is the difference there?
Well, I for sure the private sector in the private sponsorship encourages people. They try to get a balance. The government tend to encourage them, of course, to take English classes, which they do need. But they tend to give them that mentality of not to worry. It's kind of a passive reliance on welfare. It seems to be what they are introduced to. The job market success becomes less and less likely as time goes on because they're used to having these handouts within the first year. Now, mind you, they are expected to be self-sufficient within a year, but we are finding the percentage between government-sponsored refugees and privately sponsored refugees are quite different. And we will say that the privately sponsored refugees is taught to balance between, like, some of them come and they need their skills upgraded, education, and at the same time gain financial independence. The private sponsored refugee tends to motivate them to be able to find that independence. And for the ones that I've dealt with, they want to be working. They really do. They want to be self-sufficient. They want to build a new life for themselves. They know they're in a country where anything is available to them as long as they work for it and work hard.
Mm-hmm. Now, something that's been happening, it seems to be a growing phenomenon all over the world, and when we're talking about this proportional representation, it seems that the Christian community is systematically being left out of this. I find that a lot of Syrian refugees, various refugees coming from the Middle East, tend to not be of the Christian faith. And in having worked on in behind the scenes in all of this, have you experienced the same thing? Have you noticed that it seems is it more difficult to bring Christians over, for example, than it is to bring non-Christians?
Yes, I do find that. For the private sector, I find that it seems to take much longer for the private sponsorship refugees to come over, and especially those as Christians. You have to remember, Christianity, especially in the Middle East, has experienced a genocide, and most often the government is not recognizing that, even though it's been brought up in Parliament a number of times, and they've asked to please recognize this, that the Christians are being, there is a genocide going on, and that we really need to be able to help them with that. And in my own experience, actually really back from even the Vietnamese. I remember having Christians refused, and back then, I remember one gentleman being refused. Actually, I'm sorry, it's not the Vietnamese, it was a Middle East Christian from Iraq, and he was refused, but he was being interviewed by a Muslim immigration officer in I think it was Damascus, Iraq at the time, Damascus I think it was, and he was refused, and it was because he had identified the tribe that Muslim came from, or that kind of group that it came from, saying these are the people that were persecuting me and why I had to run and what his story was, which is a true, authentic story. But they found him inadmissible, not believing his story. But I found out that he was actually interviewed by a Muslim from the particular group that he said that was the one that persecuted him, was a group and that persecuted him. So there was a conflict of interest there, and I actually brought that up, and we were able to resubmit that application. But even from back then, I found that had happened. And now I had an opportunity of going to Lebanon, actually, and sitting and talking with some Christian refugees. And I did say to them, up the, I think it was 2,500 that the Prime Minister brought to Canada on the Syrian relief at that time, do you know how many were Christians? And they said, well, none of my friends or none of them, and they all, felt that it was the majority were Muslims that arrived, that came.
Yeah, well, that does seem to be the underlining agenda. Whether that's coming directly from the Trudeau government or not can be debated. But considering that government doesn't seem to be the answer here, what sort of advice might you have for anybody who may be watching this and they're thinking, you know what, these people need help over there. I want to help. I want to help bring them over here because they need to leave this war-torn country. I just don't agree with the way the government goes about it and how they just put them in here. What sort of advice might you have for people who might want to get involved but not so much with the government?
Well, for me, I would love to see the government get out of it altogether and put any resources that they have in spending to get these people over and putting it in and help support the private sector into bringing them over where they can be mentored. And I would really love to see the government do that. But I don't think it's going to go that way. So I would say that the other issue that we have at the moment is that the government is putting caps on the sponsorship agreement holders. So you have to come under, there's a couple of ways you can sponsor. A community sponsor, which is a community group that would get together. A group of 5 can sponsor. And then you come under what they call a sponsorship agreement holder, where a larger organization will sign an agreement with the Canadian government, and you come under that umbrella as a constituent group. And that constituent group is usually faith-based. So you would have to find your church or your mosque or your association that might have that to come as a constituent group and sponsor a refugee with you. The problem is the government has put caps on us. They have scaled back what the sponsorship agreement or the private sector is allowed to do. They're saying that we continue to put them in the backlog situation because we're continuing to put in sponsors or refugees that we would like to sponsor. So they're saying that we are helping to backlog the system. Now, so what I can tell you about that is years ago, let's say about 10 years ago, I attended in Winnipeg a conference. It was a cross-Canada conference, and it was talking about the private sponsorship of refugees. And what the government told us at that time was, okay, we have a backlog. The backlog, now, you can't quote me exactly on numbers, it's a while ago, but let's just say the backlog at that time was about 10,000 in the system. And the government said, okay, we need to handle this background, and we would like to put limits on all of the sponsorship agreement holders. We did not like it at all, but they said, if you continue to put them in, how are we going to clear up the backlog? So we allowed them then to, although we agreed to disagree, we did allow them and say, okay, let's give this a try. We won't put as many in. You can give us a limit of what we're allowed to put in, and we'll abide by what you're saying. That was 10 years ago. And now it's tripled the backlog. It didn't work, and it's not going to work again. And they're proposing the same thing to us again. Yes, we'll clear up the backlog, but it's not going to come without any pain. They didn't tell us what the pain was, but already we see that they have put a number of restrictions and have are capping it much lower than they did before on what we are allowed to submit. And we don't know what... Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, it seems the more they get involved, the tougher and more complicated and more difficult things get.
Oh, well, it is, and the long processing times has always been an issue with the government. And but yet, when they want to bring somebody over, they very successfully brought over groups when things have happened, like when the Vietnamese came, and I think there was a time there where the Hungarian there was a program where they brought a lot of the Hungarian refugees, and they were able to process them quite quickly. And even when they brought the Syrian refugees this time, the ones that Trudeau decided to bring over, they came quite quickly, within a year. And now it's going to take 2, 3, maybe even 4 years to get anybody here. So, it seems to not be getting better in that way. The support for the private sponsorship program within the government, to me, is not as strong as it could be.
Unbelievable that they would be putting caps on the very organizations and people who are actually making a real difference, actually assimilating these refugees into society, putting them up in homes, finding them jobs, doing what the government really should be doing, and they're the ones putting the cap on you guys. It's absolutely ridiculous, and in fact, I think we need to, take a step back here. And if the government wants to say, well, if you just stop submitting these, we won't have so much of a backlog. Well, how about if you stop dropping bombs in the Middle East? We won't have people fleeing war-torn countries. It's time that we take a serious look at our domestic foreign policy here and realize that intervening in the Middle East is not at the best interests for anyone. And it's always done under the guise of humanitarianism. So I think we need to look back at, the root causes of why we have refugees coming here in the first place, and then maybe we can, we can get to the point of figuring out how to safely, properly bring them here. And it seems that that's going to be through the private sector, through organizations such as yours.
Yes. Well, if you talk to any refugee, they want to be home. They don't want to be searching in another country to start over again. And they remember before the bombs dropped and things, especially in Syria, they had a good life in Syria, and all of a sudden bombs were dropped and everything destroyed and everything taken from them. But I'll tell you, their faith has not been taken from them. And I sometimes look at them and think, wow, if I could have such faith, especially the Christians. We've seen it ourselves where Christians have been beheaded because they would not deny Christ. And they are not fighters. The Christians in the Middle East are taught not to fight, and their belief is that they don't want to be fighting. They just want to live in peace. They would like and would want to go home if that was possible. They wish that they would never have to leave their home. You hear them talking about the beautiful countryside, the peace they had, and the kind of life they had, and how very family-oriented they were and still are, as they bring those qualities here and their expertise here, because there's a lot that come that lend a lot to our country in many ways, in their skills and what they bring with them. The diversity is wonderful, but they would rather be home if there were no bombings. And I think even in the heart, some of them are saying, if we get peace again, they said it to me. If we get peace again, you'll have to come visit. You'll have to come over to our place. Let us show you our land. Let us show you that, and we would love to have you. Mm-hmm. Some of them left beautiful farms and beautiful houses. They had to. I mean, they were bombed and they were gone, and it was taken from them. But yes, if the fighting stopped and if there was peace again, many of them would love to be home.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the biggest displacements of human beings we've seen in history, really. It's history in the making right now. So any final thoughts on how you see the future of the refugee program going here in Canada, and what really needs to be done?
What really needs to be done, anybody that's involved in the Christian faith needs to help their Christian brothers and sisters. And of course, the Muslim people are helping their people, which is wonderful as well. And because all people are suffering, and we are all human in this, we all are on a journey. This is not our ending place, and we are all refugees in a way. It's a journey on this life, and we need to be connected to one another and help one another. But if anybody is out there in a faith group, and anybody's got a church that really wants to sponsor, then it would be really wonderful if they would get involved, would speak to their church and ask them how they can do this. And, and most churches within Canada know somewhat of the program or know an avenue of how to find out how they can take part in sponsorship.
Yeah, excellent advice. I would encourage anybody watching this right now, if you are associated with a local parish, local church, if it's your mosque, whatever it is, go on down there and have a talk with them and see if you can figure out how to raise the kind of funds to start a sponsorship program within your church. Because as we've learned today, the government is not the answer. So thank you so much for talking to us and giving us some insight into what it's been like over the last 20 years bringing refugees here into Canada.
Okay, thank you very much.